Thank you, Salvador. Okay, hi everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. Let me know if you can see it.
Yep, that's working.
Brilliant, thank you. So first of all, just to reiterate the disclaimer, I'm giving this talk in my personal capacity and I'm not representing any organisation. So just to get that bit over and done with, just to be clear. So when we talk about, I'm just going to go straight into it. When we talk about action through Triratna Earth Sangha, it usually seems to mean demonstration or sitting meditation and that type of activism. But this session is a call to a different type of action. I'm hoping that I can help you, give you a greater understanding of what you might be able to do to influence change. And I also hope that this will offer a different path to activism for those who are looking for an alternative or a new perspective. And I think we mentioned just in the introduction about your working lives, and I appreciate not everybody is working. So, you know, what I'm telling you might also apply to volunteering or any other interaction you have with organisations, you know, as a consumer or however you interact with companies and organisations. So the workshop is in two parts. First of all, we will explore our interconnectedness with nature and the economy. And in the second part, I'm going to give you some tools to help you address what you have identified. So to start with, you may have seen there's some great quotes from Sangharakshita on the Triratna Earth Sangha website about why engaging with climate and nature issues aligns with Buddhist principles, including the principle about having metta for all beings. And maybe you've heard or read these before, but they're really worth bearing in mind and having a look. I've just included a small one here. He said in 1979, I feel quite strongly that this is something that the FWBO needs to look into and to take even an active part in, the general ecological issue. So if you're looking for a Triratna kind of authority for getting involved in ecological issues, then there it is. When we discuss the climate and nature crises, we often express frustration, sadness and anger, and how we can deal with these feelings in a Buddhist way. But what if we could also apply other Buddhist teachings, such as right livelihood and mindfulness? Many of us are already doing that in our personal lives with our consumer and lifestyle choices. And could we extend this even into our professional lives? So right livelihood is often interpreted as making your living in a way that does not cause harm and that is ethically positive. And it's a way to earn a living without compromising the precepts. And often I think from my understanding of that within the Triratna community, it often involves working together with other Buddhists. But what if it also means taking your Buddhist views, and particularly your eco-Buddhist views, and letting them inform your work outside the Sangha and also your interactions outside the Sangha with organisations? And here, I don't mean that everyone has to be climate scientists, ecologists, or sustainability professionals. Right livelihood is about finding work that makes you happy and is right for you. However, as Buddhists, we think about the interconnectedness of everything. Think about your interconnectedness, not just with the earth, but with the human systems that you are part of. You may work in a company, or you may buy from a company in your role as an individual or through your work. Corporate activity is one of the things that most needs to change to deal with the ecological crises. We are part of this web of daily transactions, which we're going to come on to explore in a little while. And here's the quote that Savajit already read to you, so I won't read it again, but it's this feeling of kind of being, you don't really have much choice. We're in these relationships, and so we're kind of stuck in causing harm within these organisations that we're part of without having much choice. So I just want you to consider for a moment how the elements of your body are no different from the earth and the living beings around you. We're all made up of the same matter. We're connected by our shared dependence on the earth, the sun, the water, and our shared origins. We all live and die. We are cells, energy, liquid, biological matter. The materials that pass through our body, the food and drink, return to the earth and cycle around again, coming back to us, passing through the rocks, into the sea, through the clouds, maybe being drunk by other creatures and cycling back to us. So that's our interconnectedness with nature. Now turning to our interconnectedness with humans and society. Our activities as humans leave an imprint on other living beings, as we may disturb their habitats. But even more than that, we're part of the economic web of human activity. There are long chains of connection between the food we consume and the nature it comes from. So who has grown our food? What habitats have been displaced to grow it? How have food or other products been transported to us, and what has been used to do so? What are the effects on other living creatures of chemicals used in making our food and our products? And where did the packaging come from, and where will it go? Where does our water and waste go? And where did our clothes come from, and what natural resources we use to make them, including water, plants, and fossil fuels? So as you can see, we're inextricably linked to this cycle of human activity, and that in itself has impacts on nature. Every action you take every day has some connection with the natural world. So I just want you to think of all the relationships you have with companies and other people, organisations, and how these also connect you with impacts upon nature. So if you think about those connections and the supply chains that bring things to you, like invisible lines connecting you into a web of activities and impacts. So how does that make you feel? So we're going to go into breakout rooms for 5 minutes, or maybe slightly longer actually, to share thoughts on how you feel, what your interconnectedness is, both with nature and with this economic web, and how, just kind of think about the feelings that that brings up for you. So if we can stop the screen share, please. I don't seem to be able to do it from my end, sorry. Thank you. Oh, you are all still there. Can we go into breakout rooms, please? Is that everybody back? Yeah. Okay. Well, so I hope you had some good chat. Anyone feel like sharing anything, or should we maybe move on? Okay, we'll move on. But I hope you really, I hope it was interesting talking about what came up for you when you thought about those things. Oh, I need to share my screen again, don't I? Can you see that? I can't see you, so somebody shout yes, please.
Yes, that's fine. Sorry, I was putting my thumbs up, but I forgot.
So now that you've identified those links that you have, I wonder if you can use your Buddhist skillfulness and mindfulness in your interactions with business. Can you weave your eco-Buddhist values into the companies that you have relationships with, professionally and personally? And just to reiterate there, you don't have to work, you don't have to be, employed. We all have those relationships, even retired people. So I've heard it said that we all need to radically change and rebuild our worldviews to adapt and prepare for the unfolding climate and biodiversity crises. This adaptation will need to be continuous and fast, as change is happening faster than we think, and it will actually continue to accelerate. That abrupt recognition that our worldviews don't scan very well anymore is perhaps familiar as a concept to us as Buddhists, because it's comparable to the teachings on delusion as one of the 3 poisons. So if we think about the Nirvana Sutta, it says delusion is a cause for the origination of actions. Any action performed with delusion, born of delusion, caused by delusion, originating from delusion, wherever one's selfhood turns up, there that action will ripen. Where that action ripens, there one will experience its fruit. So in contemporary society, we are perhaps failing to see the world as it really is. We're deluding ourselves as society by not seeing more clearly what we are doing to the earth. Climate change and the ecological crisis are the ripening fruit of our actions, which stem from this delusion. So the Buddhist path encourages us to transform our worldview, to abandon delusions and seek wisdom. Buddhism offers us a worldview much better equipped for the change that we need than that of a lot of other people. The perception of nature as part of us and us as part of nature, respecting nature, trying to tread lightly and take no more than we need. But those are all very Buddhist approaches, but this conflicts with the predominant worldview of being able to just take and plunder natural resources as we like. So as Buddhists, we have a valuable perspective to offer society. I'm now inviting you to consider how you can be a quiet disruptor of the status quo, business as usual, within your daily work or actions, your daily interactions. As well as protesting from the outside, there is a real opportunity here for us as Buddhists to help change from the inside, to offer solutions and be part of building new systems. And that brings us to another Buddhist principle, compassion. Many people have vested their time, their energy, their careers, reputation, and success in the current system, which they may lose if the system changes. This has been described by one writer, Alex Stephan, as like a set of shackles. So when we think about the companies, financial institutions, and the people within them maintaining this business as usual status quo, it can be easy to feel really angry and frustrated at them. But if you think about their shackles, it's easier to understand their resistance and to feel compassion for them and to really take a Buddhist approach to that. So I'm not going to do it now just because we don't have lots of time, but I've given you there some stages of a green metta bhavana. So next time you do the metta bhavana, you could try a different variant where you apply loving kindness to yourself, people you know, people you don't know, who are all carrying on with this business as usual and stuck in that web that we visualized. And then also all living beings and how we're just part of all living beings. And when you do this, think especially about the feelings that arise for you and other people about being trapped in that web of business as usual, how hard it is to change, and use compassion and loving kindness and send green energy to empower them. And when you do that last stage and you think about all living beings, just think about the variety of species and ecosystems, the sheer variety of how many there are that we don't even know about, and how we're drawing our energy from the earth and how we can give our energy back to the earth in different ways. So that's there for you to come back with. You'll get the slides at the end so that you can go back and look at that when you want to. So now part 2, tools. What tools can I offer you to help with what I'm suggesting? We can wait years for climate legislation to take effect. You know, I'm sure you're all feeling a little bit frustrated after the proceedings at COP27. But if we change the ways we do business and our relationships, we could actually address climate and nature risks ourselves without needing to wait for legislation. And just noting there that I'm not saying legislation is not needed and policy, that they're still very much needed, but there are things that we can do in the meantime. The corporate and the finance world is in a period of fast change with growing expectations of business in relation to sustainability. But it doesn't just need to change from the top down. It also needs to be changed for everyone that it's part of it from within. So if you think about the need for both a carrot and a stick to drive climate and nature action, the stick is those that have brought court action against big companies like Shell, or the activists like Extinction Rebellion. The carrot is those who are trying to help and incentivize companies to change from within. And there's really a valid place for both, and they complement each other. But why should we as Buddhists do this? Buddhism talks about personal responsibility and encourages us to have awareness of our actions and recognize their consequences. Karma means action. I'm obviously not saying that, that each individual bears responsibility for solving the entirety of the climate and ecological crises, but that we bear collective responsibility. And that breaks down into each of us taking personal action within our sphere of influence and our capability. Just if each of one does a little bit, it's a little bit like all those hands coming out of Avalokiteshvara. So in the workplace, I'm just going to give you some knowledge to equip you for this. And I know that not all of you are in workplaces, but again, this really does apply to other organisations as well. So when a company sets climate targets to reduce their greenhouse emissions, they often have very little idea or plans of how they'll actually realise them. How much do you know about the climate or sustainability targets and strategy of the organisation you work for, or volunteer for, or buy from, and those of any clients and suppliers? These targets are often proclaimed on a website as part of marketing in big companies. But how much do you know about what underpins them? And how much faith do you have that they'll actually be achieved? To be achievable, long-term targets need to be accompanied by measurable and realistic short and medium-term interim targets and plans of how they're actually going to meet them. This starts from a board of directors, the tone they set from the top, the messages they give, what metrics their pay is tied to, and how sustainability is factored into every board decision. These top-level decisions need to flow into the everyday business of the company. And again, this links back to Buddha's principles of interdependence and interconnectedness. The actions of each area of the business are dependent on direction from the board, but the board achieving its targets is dependent on all areas of the business performing their part. So really, we must all be experts in sustainability. Your employer probably has properties that it owns, leases, or builds. It will need to think about reducing the operating carbon footprint of its properties, for example, the energy, but also the embedded carbon and waste in the materials used in building or refitting them. Even if you as an employee are not involved in managing property, is it not of interest to you that the properties you work in and spend time in every day are built and managed sustainably? Your workplace purchases goods and services to support its operations and also to use in its own goods or services. Global supply chains are massive and extremely complex and responsible for extraordinary amounts of greenhouse gases and also nature impacts. This is often where the most carbon is hiding and not always immediately obvious. So again, coming back to the Buddhist principle of interconnectedness, even if you as an employee or whatever relationship you have with the organisation are not responsible for buying, might you question the origin and environmental impact of the products and services that you consume as an individual or in the course of your work? A company, in its role as customer, can also require that its suppliers reduce environmental impacts associated with the supply of goods or services. Other aspects of this, your employer, the organisation, may be able to get a better deal from its bank by making its business loans conditional on meeting sustainability targets. And also it might be able to access additional special finance purely for green projects to help it become more sustainable. This opportunity and also countless other business opportunities may not yet have occurred to leadership, and it could be an area where you could add value by asking questions. Or maybe you actually work in finance and you could look for opportunities to work in greening finance. Finally, human resources. Could your performance targets include climate objectives? Could you request sustainability training specifically linked to your department's sustainability policies and targets? Could you suggest having sections on sustainability in your employee handbook and your contract of employment? For example, covering sustainable travel, sustainable dress code, and energy use. I'm going to share some links at the end for some wording for these type of contractual clauses in case it's useful. One example is my contract of employment allows me to take an additional day of holiday if I travel abroad and use an alternative means of transport instead of plane. So how does this relate to your work? Well, in the same way as you think about reducing your own personal carbon footprint through the way you travel and make consumer decisions, it's all about finding the carbon in your day-to-day work and the materials that you use. And again, I just want to reiterate this, it doesn't have to be a strict employment relationship. It could be any organisation you're involved in. So I'm going to send you off into a breakout room again. And I'd like you, please, to think about and discuss the actions you perform in relation to an organisation that you work for or you volunteer for, what materials you use, and what the carbon footprint is and the natural resources or nature impact that are directly or indirectly associated with them. So that might be through travel, energy consumption, buildings, or embedded within goods or services. Brilliant. So just before I kick off again, I hope you all had an interesting discussion about that. And I want to apologise, I was told I was going a little bit too fast for everybody. So just to let you, I will try and slow down, but just to know that the slides that we're going to share at the end do have the speaker's notes of everything that I'm saying, if you want to go back over it, and yeah, so you'll have them, but I will try to slow down. So I'm just going to share my screen again. So you might not feel that you have much influence in decisions at work or in your life generally that involve climate or environmental impacts. If you aren't in a position to make decisions to create change, could you simply ask the questions to influence change by those who can? I'm going to give you a run through of the things you might be asking companies about. So there are organisations such as Planet Groups that says everyone can be part of the solution, and Project Drawdown that says every job is a climate job. And you can see the links here. You can check out their free online guides. As I said, you'll have the slides afterwards. They give practical ways you can unleash your employee power and bring climate solutions into work, or your volunteer power, or whatever power you find in your relationship with organisations. Examples include forming a working group with like-minded colleagues to brainstorm and instigate collective action. It recommends choosing the right focus for your role to find out where you can make an influence. You can also use Javier's questionnaire, a free questionnaire, and notes that anyone can use to ask organisations about their climate ambition. And it also must be recognised that this transition isn't easy, and some companies have more resources than others. A questionnaire can be a great conversation starter. But if you work for a small business or company that's starting to get to grips with these issues, there's also something called Lila's board paper, which is great tips and advice for directors of small companies. So you could always kind of signpost people to that. So those are all available on the Chancery Lane Project website. Those are all kind of template wording for things. There's also, I referred to Alex Steffen earlier, and his article, Old Thinking Will Break Your Brain, is on there, and also a few things that I'm going to come on to soon. So all the links are there for you. So now I'm just going to give you a little bit of tools to equip you by explaining to you what net zero actually is, so you can really understand what you're asking organisations. The term net zero is bandied about a lot, but it can hide a multitude of sins. And that's why you need to understand it if you really want to know what companies are doing. Net zero is the point where there is no net impact on the climate from greenhouse gas emissions. This is through a combination of reducing and removing carbon. So if you think about a set of scales balancing the greenhouse gases, or sometimes we call them GHGs, in and out of the atmosphere. However, this could be achieved today without reducing emissions at all, by simply offsetting them all. Offsetting is where you buy credits for somebody else to reduce or remove their GHG emissions to balance out your own. So you could be at net zero technically, but you could be continuing to pump GHGs into the environment by paying someone else to either not produce GHGs or plant some trees. A company should first reduce as many of its greenhouse gases as possible before buying credits to offset the remainder. Many companies are still relying far too heavily on offsetting instead of first making reductions, which could be described as cheating. Also, companies should be mindful about the type of offsetting projects their credits are financing. For example, they might just be paying others to reduce emissions, which just move the problem elsewhere, rather than investing in solutions that remove greenhouse gases. The difficulty with removing greenhouse gases is that the technology is not yet available for large-scale carbon capture and storage. The alternative is nature-based solutions such as tree planting. The problem with this is that the pace of storing carbon through newly planted trees is much slower than the carbon being released through burning fossil fuels, and rapidly releasing carbon accumulated over millions of years. It is therefore not a like-for-like exchange of carbon. Also, trees are not necessarily permanent. They might burn down, as we've seen in Australia, California, and the Amazon. We need long-term carbon storage that will stay stored for centuries. Nature-based solutions are really important in their own right for biodiversity, but they won't get us there on their own. What we really want to see companies doing is setting what's called science-based targets consistent with limiting global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees C. There's a massive disconnect between company pledges of ambition and daily company business. This could be described as greenwashing, and it's certainly inconsistent with transparency and the Buddhist principles of truthful communication. There are various elements to consider in the ambition of net zero targets. Not all of these might be directly relevant to your position as an employee or a volunteer or a consumer. Bear with me though, because they're hugely relevant to the karma of the company you are dealing with. As a Buddhist, hopefully by virtue of your own interconnectedness with that company, you will be interested in finding out how truthfully and transparently the company communicates its position. First of all, does a company's net zero target cover all scopes of greenhouse gas emissions? So that's scopes 1, 2, and 3. This means not only direct emissions of burning fuel, which is scope 1, or indirect emissions from the electricity purchase, which is scope 2, but also all indirect embedded emissions from goods and services in its value chain, both upstream and downstream, which is known as Scope 3. Scope 3 emissions are very often the biggest source of companies' emissions, and if they're not included within the target or the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions, it's not being very ambitious. For some large companies, you can easily find out whether they're really covering all scopes of emissions, but some companies won't publish this information, so you might have to ask. Small companies might not even know about the different scopes of emissions. Most people don't. But if you could ask in a compassionate and tactful way, you might be helping them to upskill, which they'll need to do as it's eventually going to be legally required of all companies. The other thing you need to think of, even if they have included all scopes of emissions in their targets, what have they considered the warming pathway that they're aligning the targets to? So ambitious targets will aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions steadily, starting as soon as possible, rather than carrying on as usual and then doing it really rapidly just in time for 2050. So on these graphs, you see the line going upwards as emissions rise and then peak and start falling. Now, if you think about how all the area under the line on that graph is the greenhouse gases that have been released. So as you see on the bottom left graph, there are different possibilities of when the release of greenhouse gases will peak and start falling. So there's different trajectories and different pathways there. And on the right-hand side, you can, the graph at the top right, you can see a green line aligned with the 1.5 degree pathway, and blue lines showing us the trajectory of current policies in action. So if the area under the graph is emissions, you can see that there'll be less greenhouse gases in the atmosphere if they peak sooner and start falling than if they peak later and drop really suddenly. Even if they get to zero greenhouse gases by the same date, by 2030 or 2050, and reach the same point along the bottom of the graph, they're still going to have baked in more global warming into the atmosphere, which makes it more likely that we're on track for a 3 or 4 degree future, because those greenhouse gases are then in the environment. To be on track for a 1.5 degree future, which I think is becoming more elusive, we need to halve emissions every decade. And if the company doesn't know how it will do this, any long-term pledge they make on their website will be empty and meaningless. As a stakeholder in a company, you have an interest in understanding how skillful and transparent the company's behaviour is, and how this affects your position as a Buddhist having a relationship with the company. And again, you can be a stakeholder by virtue of any relationship with a company, whether you're a consumer or an employee or a volunteer. That just hopefully gives you a little bit of context. Just some last points that go to the company's wider behaviour, not just with its carbon emissions. Have they considered the social implications of their climate strategies, including within supply chains? So even if the company that you have a relationship with is taking ambitious action to decarbonise their operations, they might be passing down responsibilities to those lesser equipped to bear them, or they might have some human rights implications related to employment or land rights or water rights. As an employee, you might be in a better position to see the company's impacts than its directors, or you might be completely distanced from them along a long chain of supply connections stretching across the world. But again, it's something you should be asking about if you really want to understand the company's impacts. Also, a company's climate footprint goes beyond physical greenhouse gas emissions to its behaviours, relationships and policies. It might undermine its public net zero goals by its private lobbying activity. If you're interested in knowing more about this, check out Influence Map, a non-profit that researches and exposes corporate lobbying activity in relation to climate. See the link back on the resources slide for that. As an employee, you may be unfamiliar or unaware of the company's behind the scenes activities. But again, it's something that maybe you should be interested in because it links back again to both truthful communication and karma, which is based on intention. Surely it's not good karma to take action in one area whilst undermining it in another. Lastly, what are a company's impacts on nature and biodiversity? When I say biodiversity, I mean the variety of species and the integrity of ecosystems. The nature and ecological crisis can be described as twin crises. They're hugely interdependent. There's no point in getting to net zero if there's no nature left and we've destroyed the ecosystems. Indeed, we probably won't get to net zero if this happens, and we depend on ecosystems in their own right. So these are all considerations when you look at the whole company's activity and what they're publicly saying about their actions. I want to finish with a quote from the late Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. To practice right livelihood, you have to find a way to earn your living without transgressing your ideals of love and compassion. The way you support yourself can be an expression of your deeper self, or it can be a source of suffering for you and others. Our vocation can nourish our understanding and compassion or erode them. We should be awake to the consequences far and near of the way we earn our living. And that came from the heart of the Buddha's teaching. So now, I hope that I've given you some new perspectives. I'm going to invite you to share in the chat any thoughts about actions you're inspired to take after today, or things you want to find out about, and also to ask me any questions. And I think I can see lots of you in the slide, so I think that the link must have been shared, so you have all the resources that you need. I can't see any of you. Maybe we can stop the screen share now.
Yeah, stop this, yeah.
And I see there's some, there's already some questions going in the chat.
Yeah, there's a question already, Jenny.
Is there a way of directly investing in the development of carbon capture and storage? I believe so. I don't know very much about it. I think that one of the other speakers this weekend is an engineer working in carbon capture and storage. I don't know whether, I'm sure I saw that on the programme. There probably is, but I don't know exactly how you do it.
Yeah, it's a good question. That engineered session was yesterday, so
yeah,
I don't know whether that question came up because I couldn't make it. I was at a big sit, but yeah, very good question, Vijayash.
John Gibbons.
John Gibbons.
So I don't know, Julia, whether you went to that session and whether he did answer that question or not. So you don't feel like you have to answer if you don't.
I did. I started, but you know, it was at a particular point and I felt a bit overwhelmed. I thought, oh, you know, there's only so much. It makes me think of your session, and actually, yeah, I could say something very briefly. I feel like I know everything's interconnected, but there's only a limited amount of time and energy and resources that we have. And it's like, all this stuff is so interesting. And what he was doing was so interesting, but I'm not sure that carbon capture is going to be my thing. So I didn't actually stay. I actually left the session. It was no disrespect of him not being any good or anything like that. So yeah. But yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like, how far do we take this? And the takeaway that I'm working with is I've got a studio and I want to bring other people in to use it. But how do I go about that? And am I even allowed to? Because I haven't asked the people that I rent from. And how do I do that in a way that's sort of eco? I work with the body. So yeah, so I don't need a lot of resources and chemicals and stuff like that. Only the ones in your body already, hopefully. Anyway, that's me. That's enough.
But it is so overwhelming, and that's what I think. Maybe some of that came out when you discussed how you felt about being part of that web. I mean, I find it overwhelming, but it is really about starting from your position and finding where you are uniquely able to kind of do those little incremental kind of influential points.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I've definitely got some takeaways. I'm going to work more on being a vegan. I've always been a vegetarian. And I'm going to look into my banking as well. So those are two kind of really clear, instant things that I'm going to do. But yeah, absolutely. I know all of us will have many things we'll take, and things evolve, don't they? It's like a trigger. And then, you know, the litmus starts, and before you know it, bam, people have changed their lives. And yeah, maybe I'll be doing carbon capture. Yeah. I'll be my new business. Dance.
But it's also about asking those questions, because it may be that you trigger somebody else to do something who's in a better position. I think we've got an unstable internet connection. I hope that you managed to see the link to the slides, and then also the company in Germany, welfare economics. Wow, that sounds interesting. So I don't know whether everyone can see the chat, but there's a link there from Pia about welfare economics. That's really interesting. I wonder whether that's a little bit similar to donut economics, which is concerned with kind of keeping within the planetary boundaries whilst also achieving social goals. I shall copy that web link and have a look. Whilst I remember, I'm just going to chat. I'd really love to hear about if you do kind of take actions and what you think about what you're doing. And I'm just going to put my email address and my LinkedIn details in the chat. please do feel free to let me know how you're getting on, what you're doing as a result of this. And also the LinkedIn, I put that because through my job, I'm connected with a lot of people kind of who I follow, people who in business and finance who repost, so you can kind of see what's going on if you're interested in what the discussion is in business and finance about how to turn this around. Julia says, what has been your biggest success so far? So who's that addressed to, Julia? Me? Ooh, well, actually, I'm hoping, so it's interesting because I'm not now working in climate, I'm now working in biodiversity, and a lot of people don't know about biodiversity yet. And so I'm really hoping that I'm in a really good position through the organisation I'm working for to actually start making companies think about it. And we're actually going to publish a report the week after next, asking company directors telling company directors that they actually might be at risk of breaching their duties if they don't start thinking about biodiversity. And actually, last week I found myself in a room, in a virtual chat room with people from big companies, and I found myself presenting to asset managers about it. So people who really have big pots of money, you know, like pension funds, and telling them about biodiversity risk. And I was like, yes, this is where I want to be, because if I can start making these people in finance and business actually, they haven't thought about this before. They have only thought about biodiversity in the context of climate change. So for me, that's been my biggest success so far, just being really fortunate enough to be in a position where I can actually speak to the right people and tell them why they should think about it. And for me, it's really, I think the key is here to making the commercial argument, because as I was saying to someone yesterday, a lot of people in finance and business, you think, you know, why are they doing this? And actually a lot of them feel very personally, in their personal capacity, they feel very similar to us about it, but they don't feel legitimized in their business role to actually do anything about it. They don't feel like they have the right. But if you present the business case to them about why there's a legitimate business reason and why there's risk to their business, then it actually is a really persuasive argument.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, because at the end of the day, it's about whether people feel this stuff or not. And like others online here, I got involved Transition Town. I lived in Totnes back 20 years, whatever it was. But yeah, so the point, you know, often in Buddhism, until you feel the suffering, you don't really want to act, do you? And I think that's the difference. That's the difference now, today. People have experienced the pandemic. They've experienced, you know, when things aren't running smoothly. And I think people are willing and ready to actually take this stuff on board. So I think your success there is amazing. And I think, you know, the doors are opening, and it's like our chance to come forward with all these incredible things that Triratna and other movements are doing. So yeah, brilliant. Well done.
Thank you.